Let's be clear. I'm not a lawn guy. I don't subscribe to Turf Monthly. I don't spend my Saturdays meticulously edging with surgical scissors or applying 17 different kinds of chemical fertilizer that promise a green so vibrant it glows in the dark. My lawn philosophy is more laissez-faire, benign neglect, you might call it. So yeah, my front yard wasn't exactly gracing the cover of Better Homes and Gardens. There were some dandelions cheerfully dotting the landscape. I think they add a splash of color. A healthy patch of clover thrived near the mailbox, which the bees seemed to appreciate. The grass? Mostly green, but maybe not the uniform, crew-cut perfection you see on golf courses. And yes, there was a rather handsome, moss-covered decorative rock near the maple tree that I'm pretty sure was there when dinosaurs roamed the earth, or at least since the house was built. It had character. Contrast this naturalistic idol, as I saw it, with the property next door, belonging to one Mrs. Agnes Gable. Agnes's lawn was less a lawn and more a terrifyingly flawless green carpet. It was rumored she measured blade height with calipers and had her landscapers sign non-disclosure agreements. Her flower beds were geometrically perfect, her shrubs tortured into unnatural spheres. Her yard didn't just whisper conformity, it screamed it through a chemically enhanced megaphone. Personally, I liked my slightly wilder patch of green. It felt real. It felt comfortable. It felt, apparently, like a direct violation of the sacred covenants of the Oak Meadow Homeowners Association. The letter arrived, as HOA decrees often do, on official-looking, heavy bond paper designed to convey gravitas and impending financial penalty. The subject line alone made my eye twitch. Notice of violation. Landscape maintenance and aesthetic non-compliance. I scanned the bulleted list of my supposed crimes against curb appeal. Presence of broadleaf weeds. Okay, guilty as charged on the dandelions, but they're cheerful. Uneven turf height. Patchy areas. It's called character, people. Visible discoloration. Dead patches. Noted. Probably where the dog pees, give me a break. Unapproved landscape ornamentation. They meant Bartholomew Jr., my beloved mossy rock. Overgrown shrubbery. Azaleas near property line. They were flowering. The letter concluded with the usual boilerplate about maintaining community standards, protecting property values, as if my dandelions were single-handedly crashing the housing market, and the required action. Remediate all listed deficiencies within 30 calendar days. Submit photographic proof of remediation to the Landscape Committee chairperson, Mrs. Agnes Gable. Failure to comply would result, naturally, in daily fines sizable enough to require a second mortgage. I read it aloud to my wife, Linda, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Unapproved landscape ornamentation? They cited the rock, Linda. Bartholomew Jr., he's practically family. Linda sighed, peering over my shoulder. She wasn't a fan of the HOA's nitpicking, but she also wasn't a fan of escalating fines. Okay, it's ridiculous, Dennis, especially the rock, but the weeds are getting a little out of hand, and those bushes could use a trim. But replace the whole lawn? Get rid of Bartholomew Jr.? Just because Agnes prefers AstroTurf? I crumpled the letter slightly. This isn't about keeping things neat. It's about enforcing her specific brand of sterile perfection on everyone else. So what are you going to do? Linda asked cautiously. Are you going to fight the rock violation? Fight it? No, I said slowly. A different, much more absurd idea starting to form. I think I need to address the root of the problem. They think my yard looks bad now? They have no idea. Just to cover my bases and to fully appreciate the financial absurdity of the HOA's demands, I called 3 different landscaping companies for quotes on full remediation. Landscaper #1, Gary's Greenery. Gary walked the yard, tutting sympathetically. Yeah, HOA violation cleanup. We do a lot of these. Okay, so full weed removal, gotta get the roots. Overseeding the patchy spots, deep trim on the azaleas, haul away that big rock. Probably looking at around $800, maybe $900 for the initial job. Then you'll want regular maintenance, of course, to keep 'em happy. Landscaper #2, Precision Turf Solutions. A younger guy in a crisp uniform armed with a tablet. Okay, standard remediation protocol. We'd apply a selective post-emergent herbicide for the broadleaf weeds, aerate and overseed the turf, perform corrective pruning on the shrubbery per HOA guidelines, Section 11, Subsection C, Paragraph 2, and remove the non-compliant geological feature. Initial service, $1,150. Recommended monthly maintenance plan, $150. Landscaper #3, Vinny's yard varmints. Vinny looked like he wrestled bears in his spare time. He kicked a dandelion. Yeah, weeds. Lawn's okay, rock's a rock. Bushes need whacking. Look, I can nuke the weeds, throw down some seed, hack the bushes back, get rid of the rock. $700. Cash? So, somewhere between $700 and $1,200, plus ongoing costs, just to make my perfectly adequate yard conform to Agnes Gable's sterile vision. All because of some dandelions, patchy grass I didn't care about, and a rock that wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. It felt like paying a ransom for the right to have slightly imperfect grass. I sat on my front steps that evening, nursing a beer, staring at my list of violations. Weeds, patchy grass, rock, overgrown bushes. These were the high crimes demanding hundreds, potentially thousands of dollars to rectify. It was ludicrous. My gaze drifted across the lawn. What if the problem wasn't the minor imperfections? What if the problem was major? What if something happened that made a few dandelions seem utterly insignificant? Something that would make the HOA beg for the days when their biggest worry was my non-conforming rock. I thought about natural disasters. Floods? No, too messy. Fire? Definitely not. Earthquake? Possible, but hard to fake convincingly. And then it hit me. That sudden, terrifying geological phenomenon you see on the news sometimes. That thing that swallows cars and houses whole. A sinkhole. What if my front yard developed a sinkhole? Not a real one, obviously. I wasn't that crazy. But a fake one. A really, really convincing fake one. The idea, once planted, grew with terrifying speed. A fake sinkhole, it was perfect. How could the HOA possibly complain about weeds or patchy grass right next to a gaping, potentially hazardous hole in the earth? They couldn't. They'd be too busy panicking, calling city engineers, worrying about their property values plummeting due to geological instability. All landscaping violations would become instantly moot. Sorry, Mrs. Gable, can't trim the azaleas right now. The ground around them might collapse into the abyss. Mr. Chadwick, I'd love to remove that non-conforming rock, but it seems to be holding back the edge of the sinkhole. It was brilliant. It was insane. It was performance art of the highest caliber. I immediately started sketching. It didn't need to be deep. Just look deep. A shallow depression, maybe 6 or 8 feet across, deepest in the middle. Line it with something dark. Use paint and dirt to create shadows, the illusion of depth. Scatter some broken concrete around the edges, maybe sacrifice that non-conforming rock, and make it look like it was partially swallowed. And the masterstroke, surround the whole thing with bright yellow "Caution, do not enter" tape, stretched between stakes. Make it look official. Make it look dangerous. I presented the concept to Linda, complete with preliminary sketches. She stared at me, then at the drawings, then back at me. Dennis, please tell me you are joking. Joking? Linda, this is genius. It solves everything. It solves everything by faking a natural disaster? People will freak out. The city will come. They'll find out it's fake. We'll be arrested or sued or both. Details, details? I waved a hand dismissively. Think of the look on Agnes's face. Think of Chadwick trying to issue a violation notice for improperly simulated geological hazard. I'm thinking of lawyers, Dennis, and public humiliation. But imagine the peace, I countered. No more complaints about dandelions. They'll be too busy worrying if their own houses are about to get swallowed. Linda just buried her face in her hands. I need wine, a lot of wine. But she didn't explicitly say no. My mission, should I choose to accept it, and I absolutely did, was to create convincing catastrophe on a budget. Over the next week, I became a scavenger and a connoisseur of despair-inducing materials. The void. I bought the heaviest-duty black landscape fabric I could find at the garden center. Building a large water feature? The cashier asked. Something like that, I mumbled. I also bought several cans of matte black and dark brown spray paint. The cracks. A trip to the art supply store yielded tubes of acrylic paint in various shades of dirt, mud, and shadow. Need to paint some realistic cracks on a theatrical set, I explained to the slightly confused clerk. The debris. I collected bags of dark topsoil and gravel. The real prize came during a late-night recycling run past a construction site down the road, where I liberated several jagged chunks of broken concrete and asphalt. Perfect for that collapsed pavement look. Bartholomew Jr., my non-conforming rock, was destined to become part of the debris field. And yes, maybe a small, strategically damaged section of the fence near the hole would add verisimilitude. The tape. Online, I found it. A 500-foot roll of 3-inch wide, bright yellow caution tape. I also bought a dozen cheap plastic garden stakes. Authenticity was key. My garage started looking less like a place to park cars and more like the workshop of a very specific, slightly depressed B-movie set designer. The following Saturday, I began. I waited until mid-morning, wanting some witnesses to the initial ground disturbance. I marked out a rough 8-foot circle in a prominent section of the front lawn, deliberately close to Bartholomew Jr. Then, I started digging. Not deep, just enough to create a noticeable depression, maybe 2 feet down in the very center, sloping up towards the edges. It was hot, sweaty work. Neighbors mowing their perfect lawns paused to stare. What was Dennis doing, digging a big, messy hole in his already substandard yard? Mrs. Gable appeared at her window, her expression shifting from its usual disapproval to outright suspicion. Perfect. Once the depression was dug, I laid down the heavy black landscape fabric, carefully tucking it in around the edges and trying to create folds and shadows that hinted at depth. I used the black and brown spray paint to darken the fabric further, especially in the center, making it look like a bottomless void. Next came the artistic part. I arranged the broken concrete chunks around the rim, partially burying some, making them look like they'd collapsed inwards. I rolled Bartholomew Jr. to the edge, positioning him so he looked precariously balanced, about to tumble in. I even sacrificed a 3-foot section of my own fence, breaking the pickets and angling them down into the depression. Then, using the acrylic paints and some YouTube tutorials on scenic painting, I carefully painted dark, jagged cracks radiating outwards from the hole onto the surrounding grass and dirt. This took hours, getting the perspective and shading just right. I added shadows, highlights, layers of dirt and gravel. I even half-buried a garden gnome I didn't particularly like near the edge, his little ceramic hand reaching out tragically. By Sunday afternoon it looked disturbingly real, a chaotic, fractured mess centered around a dark, ominous hole. The final touch, the masterstroke, the element that would transform it from weird landscaping project into potential public hazard. I grabbed the hazard stakes and the giant roll of yellow caution tape. Starting at one stake, I began wrapping. Not just one strand, but multiple lines, crisscrossing, creating a dense, official-looking barrier around the entire perimeter of my faux sinkhole, encompassing Bartholomew Jr. and the tragic gnome. I stretched it tight, making sure the bold black letters were clearly visible. Caution, caution, caution. I stepped back, sweat dripping, dirt smeared on my face, and surveyed my creation. It was magnificent. It was horrifying. It looked like a genuine disaster scene had inexplicably opened up in the middle of my suburban front yard. The contrast with the neat houses and perfect lawns surrounding it was gloriously jarring. Now all I had to do was wait for morning. I barely slept, buzzing with anticipation. I was up before dawn, peeking through the blinds like a kid on Christmas morning, if Christmas involved geological hoaxes. As the sun rose, illuminating the scene, it looked even better, more alarming. The painted cracks seemed deeper, the black fabric void more menacing. The yellow tape practically glowed. 6:15 a.m., Mr. Henderson, out for his morning power walk, stopped dead in his tracks about 50 feet away. He stared. He adjusted his glasses. He slowly backed away and changed his route. 6:45 a.m. The first dog walker. A woman with a small poodle. She saw the tape, saw the hole, gasped audibly, scooped up her poodle, and practically sprinted down the street. 7:10 a.m. Cars driving by started slowing down. Drivers pointed. Passengers took pictures on their phones. 7:30 a.m. Mrs. Gable emerged to get her newspaper. She walked down her pristine path, bent over, and as she straightened up, her eyes fell upon my yard. Her reaction was cinematic. A hand flew to her chest. Her mouth formed a perfect O of horror. She dropped the newspaper and stumbled back towards her front door, likely to call every single person she knew, starting with the HOA and possibly ending with FEMA. The trap was sprung. The chaos had begun. Within the hour, the street was abuzz. Neighbors gathered in small, hushed groups at a safe distance, pointing, speculating. Did the ground collapse? Must have been that old mine shaft they talked about. There was no old mine shaft. Should we call someone? Agnes already called everyone. I heard her. And then the flashing lights. First, a police cruiser rolling up slowly, the officer inside looking wary. Then, a large white truck with Oak Meadow Public Works stenciled on the side. Finally, a sedan with the city's code enforcement logo. They had arrived. The police officer, a young woman named Officer Miller, approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the taped-off area. The two public works guys, burly men in high-vis vests, stayed near their truck, looking skeptical but concerned. The code enforcement officer, a man with a clipboard and an air of weary authority, joined Officer Miller. I chose this moment to make my entrance, stepping out onto my porch, projecting an air of worried concern. "Morning, officers," I called out. "Something wrong?" Officer Miller turned. "Sir, are you the resident here?" "Yes, Dennis Miller. What's happened?" "We received multiple calls about a possible sinkhole on your property." She gestured towards my creation. "A sinkhole!" I feigned shock, rushing down the steps. Good heavens! I noticed the ground looked unstable after that rain yesterday, so I put up the tape as a precaution. Is it serious? The public works guys ambled over, peering into the depression. One of them, whose name tag read Sal, poked the edge with the toe of his steel-toed boot. He then knelt down, squinted, and poked the black fabric liner with a thick finger. He looked up at his partner, then at Officer Miller, and started to chuckle. Officer," Sal said, trying to stifle his grin. "This ain't no sinkhole." Officer Miller looked confused. "It's not?" Nah, Sal stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. It's a hole, yeah, maybe 2 feet deep in the middle, lined with landscape fabric. Looks like somebody painted cracks on the ground. And he picked up a chunk of the broken concrete. This stuff didn't come from down there. The code enforcement officer stepped closer, examining the painted cracks, the carefully placed debris. He looked up at me, his expression shifting from concern to deep annoyance. "Mr. Miller," he said slowly, "did you create this scene?" No one was buying it. Officer Miller sighed, a deep, profound sigh. "Sir, did you intentionally fabricate what appears to be a geological hazard on your property?" Mrs. Gable, who had arrived with Mr. Chadwick in tow, pushed forward. "He did! He did it to mock us! Because we cited him for his weeds! Arrest him! Arrest him for inciting panic!" The next hour was a blur of official annoyance. Officer Miller explained, patiently but sternly, the potential charges: creating a public nuisance, inducing panic, improper use of caution tape, apparently a violation of some obscure ordinance. She pointed out the significant waste of city resources, her time, public works, code enforcement, responding to a hoax. The code enforcement officer started writing citations for unpermitted excavation. Even shallow holes sometimes need permits, and potentially for violating landscaping codes in a new, creative way. Mr. Chadwick, HOA president, practically vibrated with fury. He informed me I was facing emergency HOA fines for the fake sinkhole, failure to comply with the original landscaping violation, creating a hazard, lowering property values through notoriety, and probably for breathing too loudly. He promised swift and severe action from the board. Mrs. Gable just stood there, arms crossed, radiating pure, unadulterated, "I told you so" energy, though even she looked slightly stunned by the method of my madness. I offered feeble defenses about interpretive landscaping and raising awareness of potential ground subsidence, but nobody, least of all the police officer, was amused. I was issued a citation for creating a nuisance and ordered to dismantle the entire installation and restore the yard immediately. Dismantling Operation Ground. Chuckle was significantly less fun than building it. Under the watchful and deeply unimpressed eyes of Officer Miller, who waited to ensure compliance, I spent the rest of the morning pulling up stakes, rolling up hundreds of feet of yellow tape, and shoveling dirt back into the hole. I had to pry out the broken concrete chunks, pull up the black fabric liner, now covered in dirt and disappointment, and try to smooth the area over. Bartholomew Jr., the non-conforming rock, sat forlornly beside the filled-in depression. The tragic gnome was retrieved, slightly chipped but otherwise unharmed. Neighbors watched the cleanup with the same morbid curiosity they'd watched the creation. Mrs. Gable observed from her porch, sipping lemonade, the picture of smug victory. By lunchtime, the fake sinkhole was gone, leaving behind only a large, ugly patch of disturbed earth, looking arguably worse than the weeds and patchy grass that had started the whole affair. The yard looked terrible. The original landscaping violations were now compounded by a giant mud patch. And the HOA wasn't letting it go. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one detailed the fines for the sinkhole incident, $500 for creating a hazardous nuisance, plus reactivated daily fines, $50/day now, increased for non-compliance for the original landscaping violations, plus a new demand for immediate professional remediation of all issues, including the sinkhole patch, within 7 days, with mandatory reinspection by Mrs. Gable herself. I was back at square one, only deeper in the hole, pun intended. I was out the time and money spent on the sinkhole supplies, facing hefty fines from both the city and the HOA, and my yard looked like the site of a very small, very unsuccessful meteor strike. So, What did I do? Did I finally cave and hire Precision Turf Solutions for $1,150 plus monthly maintenance? Did I declare war again, maybe by installing AstroTurf and populating it with plastic flamingos? Honestly, I was exhausted. The Sinkhole gambit had been spectacular, briefly satisfying, but ultimately a costly failure. The fight had gone out of me. I called Vinny's yard varmints back. "Vinny," I said tiredly. "It's Dennis Miller, remember me? The guy with the rock?" Yeah, Sinkhole guy," he chuckled. "Heard about that? Classic. So, what broke now?" "Nothing broke," I sighed. "I just need the yard fixed. Pull the weeds, trim the bushes, seed the patches, make the HOA happy. And Vinny, the rock stays." Vinny came out the next day. He yanked the dandelions with brutal efficiency, gave the azaleas a much-needed haircut, spread seed over the patchy areas, including the Sinkhole Memorial, and completely ignored Bartholomew Jr. He even managed to smooth out the sinkhole patch reasonably well. $700 cash. Mrs. Gable conducted her inspection a few days later, clipboard in hand. She walked the perimeter slowly, peering intently. She couldn't find any weeds. The grass was attempting to grow. The bushes were trimmed. She scowled at Bartholomew Jr., but couldn't technically cite him again yet. She finally, grudgingly, signed off on the remediation form, lifting the daily fines. So the HOA won, I guess. My yard is now boringly compliant, except for the rock, my small, silent protest. My bank account is lighter. My relationship with Agnes Gable is permanently glacial. Was faking a sinkhole the best way to handle a landscaping violation? Objectively, no. It was childish, costly, and ultimately ineffective in the long run. But let me tell you, for those few hours that Tuesday morning, watching the neighborhood descend into mild panic, seeing the baffled faces of the police and public works guys, witnessing the sheer, sputtering rage of Chadwick and Gable, realizing they'd been duped by landscape fabric and spray paint. That was almost worth the price of admission. Almost. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I see a dandelion poking through near Bartholomew Jr. Better pull it before Agnes deploys the satellite surveillance. "So, let me get this straight," Hank said, looking over my very rough sketch of the proposed mini Stonehenge. "You want a Stonehenge replica in your front yard because your HOA doesn't like your gnomes?" "Essentially, yes," I said, nodding. "It's a historical art installation, a tribute to ancient cultures, a statement." Hank stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," I said. "I have issues with my HOA, and this is my solution." "Almost perfect, Bartholomew. Just a little more shine," I muttered, buffing the pointy red hat of my prized garden gnome with a soft cloth. Bartholomew was the centerpiece of my collection. Let's call it a collection. Some might call it clutter, but I called it art. I, Michael, am a simple man of simple pleasures, one of which is surrounding myself with kitsch. My garden, in the otherwise meticulously bland landscape of Harmony Glade Estates, was my personal canvas. And my art? Well, it consisted of a rather eclectic assortment of garden statues. There was Bartholomew, of course, the aforementioned gnome, resplendent in his red hat and fishing rod. There was Penelope, a bright pink flamingo, a classic, in my opinion. There was a family of ceramic frogs playing musical instruments. Don't ask. There was even a rather imposing gargoyle perched on a pedestal near my front door. I named him Gary. They were unique. They were colorful. They were mine. And I loved them. And then this guy shows up. He stood there, on my meticulously unmanicured lawn, his face a mask of horrified disapproval. He was tall and thin, with a neatly pressed suit, a clipboard clutched in his hand, and an expression that suggested he'd just smelled something unpleasant. He looked like the human embodiment of an HOA violation notice. "Mr. Miller?" he asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed disdain. "That's me," I said, giving Bartholomew one final polish. "And you are?" "Mr. Stern," he replied, extending a hand that felt suspiciously like a freshly starched shirt. "From the Harmony Glade Estates Homeowners Association." "Ah," I said, already knowing where this was going. "Let me guess. Someone has a problem with my artistic vision?" Mr. Stern's eyes scanned my garden, taking in the gnomes, the flamingos, the frogs, and Gary the gargoyle. His expression didn't change, but I could practically see his blood pressure rising. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice strained, "we've received a complaint, several complaints actually, regarding your exterior decorations." "Decorations?" I repeated, feigning innocence. "You mean my statues?" "These statues," Mr. Stern said, emphasizing the word as if it were a contagious disease, "are in violation of community guidelines. They are inappropriate. They are tacky. They detract from the overall aesthetic standards of Harmony Glade Estates," he said, handing over the notice. I take it, glancing it over. There's nothing in the HOA guidelines that prevents me from having statues. "Tacky?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's a matter of opinion, wouldn't you say? I find them quite charming. And they're on my property," I say, handing the notice back. "Charm is subjective, Mr. Miller," Mr. Stern said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Compliance with HOA regulations is not. These items must be removed." "Removed?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "But they're just garden statues. They're harmless." I tried to reason. I tried to explain. I even pointed out that other neighbors had garden decorations, although admittedly none quite as eclectic as mine. Mr. Stern remained unmoved. He was a robot, programmed to enforce the HOA's arbitrary rules, and my pleas for reason were falling on deaf, aesthetically offended ears. He handed me an official violation notice, informed me that I had 14 days to remedy the situation, and retreated, leaving me standing amidst my beloved statues, feeling a mixture of anger, frustration, and a growing sense of rebellious defiance. The HOA meeting, held in the Harmony Glade Estates Community Center, a room that seemed to have been deliberately designed to be as bland and uninspiring as possible, was, predictably, a farce. The board members sat at a long table, looking like a collection of disapproving owls. And then there was Agnes Prim, the president of the Harmony Glade Estates HOA and the self-proclaimed arbiter of all things tasteful, or, as I preferred to call her, the Grand Duchess of Drab. She was an older woman, impeccably dressed in a beige pantsuit that perfectly matched the beige walls of the room. She had a tightly permed hairstyle, a perpetually pursed mouth, and an air of disapproval that could curdle milk. She was, in short, the embodiment of everything I didn't want my garden to be. "Mr. Miller," Agnes began, her voice sharp and accusatory, "your collection has been brought to our attention." She said collection, as if it were a pile of radioactive waste. "My statues, Miss Prim," I corrected, trying to keep my voice calm. "They're just garden statues." "They're clutter, Mr. Miller," Agnes declared, her voice rising in pitch. "They're eyesores. They're lowering property values." "Lowering property values?" I repeated, incredulous. "They're gnomes, Agnes, and flamingos, and a gargoyle. I hardly think they're going to cause a real estate crash." They're distracting, she continued, ignoring my comment. They're offensive. They're not in keeping with the harmonious aesthetic of Harmony Glade Estates. Harmonious aesthetic? I said, looking around the room. You mean beige? A few nervous coughs echoed through the room. Agnes's face turned a shade of red that clashed violently with her beige outfit. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice dangerously low, are you familiar with the HOA bylaws? I've read them, I said, and I don't recall seeing anything that specifically prohibits garden statues. As long as they're not hazardous or obscene, I believe I'm within my rights. The bylaws are open to interpretation, Mr. Miller, Agnes said with a smug smile. And my interpretation is that your decorations are unacceptable. I tried to reason with her. I explained that the statues were important to me, that they brought me joy, that they were a form of personal expression. I even pointed out that other neighbors had garden decorations, although, admittedly, none quite as bold as mine. The other board members mostly just sat there, looking uncomfortable or bored, except for one, a younger woman with a mischievous glint in her eye. I suspected she might be a secret gnome enthusiast, but Agnes, she was unmoved. The statues, she declared, slamming her gavel down with a force that made everyone jump, must be removed. You have 1 week, Mr. Miller, and you are hereby fined $200 for violating the community aesthetic standards of Harmony Glade Estates. Aesthetic standards. It was a garden. I walked out of that meeting, my blood boiling, my sense of injustice reaching critical levels. Agnes Prim had declared war on my gnomes, my flamingos, my gargoyle, and on me. And I, Michael Miller, was not about to surrender. 1 week. That's all the time Agnes Prim, in her infinite, beige-tinted wisdom, had given me to remove my beloved garden statues. 1 week to dismantle my carefully curated collection of gnomes, flamingos, frogs, and Gary the Gargoyle. 1 week to surrender to the forces of HOA enforced conformity. 1 week to absolutely, positively not comply. I, Michael Miller, was not a remover of statues. I was a collector of statues, a defender of garden art, a champion of kitsch. And I was not about to let Agnes Prim and her band of beige-loving bureaucrats dictate what I could and couldn't have in my own yard. It wasn't just about the statues anymore. It was about principle. It was about freedom of expression. It was about the right to have a slightly tacky, utterly delightful garden, filled with whatever whimsical creatures my heart desired. This was an attack, not just on my garden, but on me, on my right to express myself, to surround myself with things that brought me joy, to have a garden gnome fishing in a plastic pond. My internal monologue was a raging torrent of defiance. They want to take away my statues? I muttered to myself, pacing my living room. Fine, let them try. But they're going to have to pry them from my cold, dead, gnome-clutching hands. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to fight back, to defend my artistic vision, to annoy Agnes Prim as much as humanly possible. And then, inspiration struck. It happened, as most of my best and worst ideas do, while I was browsing the internet, procrastinating instead of doing something productive. I was researching HOA legal battles, looking for precedents for cases where homeowners had successfully challenged ridiculous rules. And then I stumbled upon an article about Stonehenge. Stonehenge, the ancient monument in England, the mysterious circle of standing stones, Wait a minute. A slow smile spread across my face. A crazy idea, a gloriously absurd idea began to take shape in my mind. It was ridiculous. It was over the top. It was perfect. My weapon of choice, as always, was the Harmony Glade Estates HOA bylaws. That ridiculously long, incredibly detailed, and utterly infuriating document held the key to my salvation. I knew it. I just had to find it. I spent hours poring over the pages, searching for a loophole, a weakness, a glimmer of hope. I focused on the sections about landscaping, exterior decorations, and approved structures. And then I found it. Tucked away in a section titled Restrictions on Exterior Art and Landscaping was a clause that prohibited modern art installations and non-traditional landscaping elements. But, and this was the crucial part, there was an exception. A vague, ambiguous, wonderfully exploitable exception. Historical replicas and structures of cultural significance, the clause stated, were permitted, provided they met certain, vaguely defined criteria. Historical replicas, I muttered, my grin widening. Structures of cultural significance. Oh, I could work with that, very easily. The HOA wanted history? I'd give them history. I'd give them something so historically significant that it would make Agnes Prim's head spin. My plan was simple in its audacity. I wouldn't remove my statues. I would add to them. I would build a monument, a historical replica, a miniature Stonehenge, right there in my front yard. It would be, of course, a scaled-down version. I wasn't trying to recreate the actual Stonehenge, although that would have been epic, but it would be recognizable. A circle of standing stones with lintel stones balanced on top, creating that iconic prehistoric silhouette. It would be large enough to be noticeable, impressive, and utterly, completely out of place in the meticulously manicured landscape of Harmony Glade Estates. And I would argue, with a perfectly straight face, that it was a historical replica, an astronomical art installation, and a tribute to ancient cultures. Thus, exempt from the HOA's ridiculous restrictions on modern art and non-traditional landscaping, I could already picture Agnes's reaction. The sputtering outrage, the vein throbbing in her forehead, the inevitable explosion of beige-tinted fury. It was a beautiful image. I knew it was insane. I knew it was probably going to cost me a small fortune. I knew it was going to make me the laughingstock of the neighborhood, and possibly the entire internet. But I didn't care. This wasn't just about garden statues anymore. It was about principle. It was about freedom. It was about, well, it was mostly about annoying Agnes Prim. And that, I decided, was a cause worth fighting for. Operation Stone Circle was a go, and Harmony Glade Estates was about to get a whole lot more historical. The first step was finding someone to help me build this masterpiece. I needed a landscape contractor, a stone supplier, someone who wouldn't look at me like I'd completely lost my mind when I explained my vision. I found him in the form of a man named Hank, another one, owner of Rock Solid Landscapes, a company that specialized in, as his business card put it, creating outdoor spaces that rock. So, let me get this straight, Hank said, looking over my very rough sketch of the proposed mini Stonehenge. You want a Stonehenge replica in your front yard, because your HOA doesn't like your gnomes? Essentially, yes, I said, nodding. It's a historical art installation, a tribute to ancient cultures, a statement. Hank stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious, aren't you? Dead serious, I said. I have issues with my HOA, and this is my solution. I love it, Hank said, grinning. This is going to be the most interesting project I've worked on all year, but it's not going to be cheap. I don't care about cheap, I said. I care about impact. And I have plenty saved up for this. We discussed the details, the size, substantial but not too substantial. I didn't want to violate any actual building codes. The materials, large stones or possibly concrete replicas for practicality. The arrangement, A classic circle with lintel stones, of course. And most importantly, the timeline, as soon as possible. The construction process was, to put it mildly, a spectacle. Trucks arrived, carrying tons of stones, or, as it turned out, very realistic-looking concrete replicas. Actual stones would have been prohibitively expensive, and probably would have crushed my lawn. A small crane was used to lift the lintel stones into place. Workers swarmed over my yard, digging, hauling, and assembling my miniature monument to ancient history. The neighbors, as expected, were captivated. They gathered on their sidewalks, watching the construction with a mixture of shock, amusement, disbelief, and a growing sense of what on earth is that man doing? I even saw a few of them taking pictures. I suspected my mini Stonehenge was about to become the talk of Harmony Glade Estates. My internal monologue was a constant stream of triumphant pronouncements. "Take that, Agnes Prim," I muttered to myself as the stone circle began to take shape. "Enjoy your harmonious aesthetic now." I imagined her face, contorted with rage, her perfectly coiffed hair, probably standing on end. It was a beautiful thought. Of course, there was a minor hiccup. A visit from Mr. Stern, the HOA's ever-vigilant and ever-uncomfortable enforcer. "Mr. Miller?" he stammered, looking up at the partially constructed Stonehenge. "What exactly is this?" "It's a historical replica, Mr. Stern," I said with a perfectly straight face. "A tribute to ancient cultures, a landscape enhancement." "A replica?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Of what?" "Stonehenge," I said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You know, the famous prehistoric monument in England?" Mr. Stern stared at me, speechless for a moment. Then he pulled out his clipboard and started scribbling furiously. I need to consult with the board," he mumbled, and retreated, looking utterly defeated. I, of course, had all my paperwork in order. Building permits, HOA bylaws, highlighted, of course, and even a completely fabricated certificate of authenticity for my historical replica. I was prepared for a fight. But as the mini Stonehenge neared completion, I felt a growing sense of satisfaction. It was more than just a pile of rocks. It was a symbol of defiance, a symbol of creativity, a symbol of, well, of a homeowner who'd had enough of ridiculous HOA rules. It was absurd, it was over the top, it was perfect, and it was going to drive Agnes Prim absolutely crazy. The unveiling of Stonehenge Jr., as I'd affectionately and sarcastically named it, was a moment for the ages. Or, at least, for the ages of Harmony Glade Estates. It stood there, in my front yard, in all its scaled-down, historically inaccurate glory, a circle of mostly concrete stones, topped with, slightly wobbly, lintel stones, creating a monument to, well, to my defiance of the HOA. And of course, Agnes Prim arrived within minutes. She didn't even bother to park her car properly. She just screeched to a halt on the street, leaped out, and stormed towards my yard, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "What?" she bellowed, her voice echoing through the previously quiet neighborhood. "Have you done?" I emerged from behind Stonehenge Jr., a picture of calm serenity, holding a plastic trowel and wearing a completely unnecessary pair of gardening gloves. "Good afternoon, Agnes," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're admiring my historical replica, I presume." "Historical replica?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the circle of stones. This is insane. It's a pile of rocks." "It's Stonehenge, Agnes," I corrected with a perfectly straight face. "Or rather, a miniature version thereof. a tribute to ancient cultures, a landscape enhancement. Enhancement? She sputtered, her eyes bulging. It's hideous. It's preposterous. It's completely out of place. It's perfectly compliant with the bylaws, Agnes, I said with a shrug. Section on historical replicas and structures of cultural significance, remember? I've simply chosen to express my appreciation for history in a slightly unconventional way. I call it Stonehenge Jr. You built this thing just to spite me, she accused, her voice shaking with rage. I built it to enhance my property, Agnes, I said, my voice dripping with mock innocence. And to educate the community. Did you know, for example, that Stonehenge is believed to have been an ancient astronomical observatory? This very structure, I added, gesturing grandly towards my mini Stonehenge, is aligned with the summer solstice sunrise. It's spiritually significant. Agnes stared at me, speechless for a moment. Then she let out a strangled cry that sounded suspiciously like a wounded animal. I'll have this thing removed, she vowed. I'll sue you, You'll do nothing, Agnes, I said, my voice firm, because I've followed the rules. Your rules. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go commune with the ancient spirits. I turned and walked back towards Stonehenge Jr., leaving Agnes sputtering in impotent rage on my, now historically significant, lawn. The emergency HOA meeting. Part 2, because apparently destroying garden gnomes wasn't enough, was, if possible, even more ludicrous than the first. Agnes, looking like she'd aged a decade in the past few weeks, was practically foaming at the mouth. The board was starting to get tired of these constant meetings. This Stonehenge, she declared, her voice shaking with emotion, is a threat to the very fabric of Harmony Glade Estates. It's a safety hazard. It's an eyesore. It's attracting druids. I had no idea where she got that one. She'd even brought in a historian, a nervous-looking man in a tweed jacket who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. This historian proceeded to drone on about the inaccuracies of my replica, pointing out that it was the wrong size, the wrong shape, and made of the wrong materials. Then it was my turn. Miss Prim, I began, addressing the board with a calm, reasonable demeanor that was, of course, completely fake, seems to be under the impression that I've erected this structure solely to annoy her. While I admit that is a delightful side effect, my primary motivation was to create a historical replica and a structure of cultural significance as permitted by the HOA bylaws. I then presented my research, a collection of internet printouts about Stonehenge, its history, and its supposed astronomical significance. I even produced a completely fabricated certificate of authenticity for my replica, signed by a professor of ancient structures, who was actually my friend Mark, wearing a fake beard and a tweed jacket. And just for good measure, I'd invited a druid priest to the meeting. He was actually a local actor I'd hired, dressed in a white robe and carrying a fake staff. He proceeded to bless my mini Stonehenge, chanting in made-up, ancient languages and sprinkling tap, water on the stones. The other board members were, to put it mildly, bewildered. Some were clearly still loyal to Agnes, but their support was waning. Others looked confused, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. And a few, I suspected, were secretly enjoying the spectacle. Then, a woman from the back of the room stood up. She was an archaeologist, a resident of Harmony Glade Estates I'd never met before. I've examined Mr. Miller's Stonehenge, she said, her voice calm and professional. And while it's certainly not a perfect replica, it's surprisingly well constructed, and it does have some educational value. It could actually be used to teach children about ancient cultures and astronomy. That was the final blow. The board, facing a potential lawsuit, a public relations disaster, and the undeniable evidence of my somewhat educational intentions, voted to table the discussion, pending further review. The meeting ended in chaos, with Agnes screaming about historical blasphemy, and me, Michael Miller, the Stonehenge building rebel, walking out with a smug, but well-deserved, I thought, smile on my face. The HOA was losing their control, but Agnes, like a particularly stubborn stain on a beige carpet, wasn't about to give up. What followed was a period of escalating absurdity that I can only describe as the Stonehenge War. Agnes, obsessed with getting rid of my mini Stonehenge, tried every tactic she could think of. She filed complaints with the city, claiming it was a zoning violation, a safety hazard, and a public nuisance. The city inspectors came, they inspected, and they found nothing. My Stonehenge was perfectly legal. She tried to organize a neighborhood petition to have it removed. She went door to door, armed with her clipboard and her historical integrity speech, trying to convince people that my stone circle was a threat to their property values and their way of life. The petition failed miserably. Most people either politely declined to sign or slammed the door in her face. Some even added to my Stonehenge, leaving small offerings of flowers, crystals, and, yes, even garden gnomes. She even, I suspect, attempted some minor acts of vandalism. I found a few scratches on one of the stones, easily buffed out, and a suspicious-looking pile of glitter near the base of the structure. Apparently, she was hoping to make it look tacky. Of course, I had security cameras everywhere, capturing her every move, and I, of course, responded in kind. Not with vandalism, oh no, I was above that. I responded with enhancements. I added ancient runes to the stones. They were actually just random symbols I'd found on the internet, but I claimed they were ancient Celtic inscriptions with deep spiritual meaning. I installed mystical lighting around the structure, color-changing LED lights that would illuminate Stonehenge Jr. in a rotating rainbow of hues, creating a nightly light show that was visible from space, or at least from Agnes's bedroom window. I created a druid garden around the base of the structure, filled with, supposedly, historically significant plants, herbs, flowers, and even a few non-poisonous mushrooms. I even added a small sign that read, "Druid Garden, do not eat the mushrooms, unless you want to talk to the stones." And because why not, I hosted a summer solstice party at my mini Stonehenge. I invited all the neighbors, except Agnes, naturally, put up decorations, more gnomes, of course, and served refreshments, including Stonehenge-shaped cookies. I even hired a fake druid priest, the same actor from the HOA meeting, to perform a completely made-up ancient ritual to celebrate the sun's energy. The local news showed up, filming a segment about the quirky homeowner who built a Stonehenge replica in his front yard, and the ongoing feud with his HOA. It was a glorious, ridiculous, utterly over-the-top spectacle. And with each passing day, with each new escalation, I could feel Agnes's frustration growing, her power waning, her sanity slipping. The Stonehenge had become more than just a pile of rocks. It was a symbol of defiance, a testament to the power of creative and slightly unhinged resistance. And I, Michael Miller, the accidental druid, was winning.